Scientific investigation and clinical research into psychedelics was blooming in the 1950s. There showed to be a great potential for revolutionizing the treatment of mental health issues. However, everything came to a screeching halt when Timothy Leary rose to fame. He helped acid escape the lab, corrupted and endangered the masses, caused all funding for research to dry up, and ultimately caused the outlawing of psychedelics. Or at least, this is what they would like you to think. Timothy Leary was a psychologist working at Harvard who, after traveling to Mexico, had a mushroom experience that changed his life. He claimed to have learned more about the human mind in a few hours than in all of his years of studying psychology. He then came back as an outspoken advocate for psychedelics and for a societal, spiritual revolution. Turn on, tune in, and drop out was the infamous line. At the basis of what Leary advocated for was the walking away from games of society perpetuated by ego and returning to a more holistic relationship with nature. He wanted people to take psychedelics, question and challenge their beliefs, values, and attachments to their roles in society, and ultimately walk away. Now, this is surprisingly what a lot of us want and feel after taking psychedelics, to just drop the roles in games and return to nature while behaving more as spirit and not ego. To return to the simple, the archaic, and the organic. So why did Leary become so villainized by society? Psychedelics were made illegal not because Leary was wrong, but because he was right. Young people started taking LSD, dropping out of the roles given to them by their parents, voting against the war, standing against racism, and living more freely. This had major implications for those who benefited from the status quo. Psychedelics acted as gasoline for the counterculture movement, and mainstream narrative began to turn grim. Where once were stories about magic mushrooms and psychedelic potentials, now was propaganda based on politics and not science. Horror stories began to emerge of people frying their brains, being born with birth defects, and even dying. Was there evidence or any merit to the reports? No. In the same way reefer madness was political hype, so was the war on drugs, or better termed by Graham Hancock, the war on consciousness. In the face of the new movement behind all this disaster, Timothy Leary. Leary was without a doubt one of the most vocal and passionate people ever to advocate for psychedelics. Our concept of set and setting even comes from the man himself. However, the absolute disregard for backlash and dedication to the cause made him a prime target for the government and media. The esteemed Ivy League school of psychologists who did drugs, fell from grace, went insane, and is now poisoning your children. This is what drugs can and will do. Now, Leary admittingly was not perfect, but the pinning of the war on consciousness in the CSA on Leary is an absolute fallacy. It's a bullshit conclusion supported by both the nefarious and the condition-minded. It's a cop-out argument to avoid facing the unsettling truth. The truth being that our government and systems at play do not have our best intentions at heart. They do not care about your liberty to explore your mind, love who you want, express yourself the way you want, or believe what you want, if it goes against their model of extracting labor and wealth. They are in the business of control and profit-making. If you go against the model, you stand in their way. It's reminiscent of the Roman government persecuting the cults of Dionysus because it challenged the conservative macho man model. People can't explore nature and themselves because the mission of the dominator culture stands against nature and the individual experience. If you're busy taking psychoactive plants, exploring ecstasy, love, and transcendence, you're probably too busy to be waging war and sacrificing your freedom to support things that simply don't matter. The war on drugs was also a Trojan horse for a cultural witch hunt. People in the 60s had achieved too much freedom, and their sense of liberty was shaking the very foundations of control set in place. And to attack people solely based on belief or identity would cause a backlash which could amount to too much for the government and ruling class to handle. However, a quote from Richard Nixon's aide, John Ehrlichman, gives transparency into why the war on consciousness happened. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We know we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. They vilified Tim Leary and made him a boogeyman to scare the public into being good little status quo supporting children. And this was successful. People began to associate psychedelics with societal deviance and moral impurity. And this boogeyman effect is still alive today. Despite being in the middle of a psychedelic renaissance, the notion of using psychedelics for social change, other than that approved by the medicalization monopolization model, is often claimed as a threat against the overall movement. The former CEO of MindMed, a psychedelic pharmaceutical corporation, J.R. Ron has openly attacked decriminalization efforts and those who fight for the liberation of nature. In an interview with Forbes, Ron said, "This isn't the 1960s all over again. I want nothing to do with those kinds of folks who want to decriminalize psychedelics. You don't have to be a revolutionary. You just need to show up to work every day, do the rigorous science, take a pragmatic approach, and we'll get there. Following pushback against the blatant mental laziness, Ron even asserted on his Twitter that people like Rick Doblin could be arrested, and all efforts in recent years would be ruined if people pursue decriminalization activism. Isn't it strikingly curious that those who are the most passionate, committed, and dedicated to psychedelics tend to support decriminalization, whereas those who seek to extract money from the new market oppose it? Why is it that those with next to nothing for personal psychedelic experience speak the loudest and directly against the values and beliefs of those who have an abundance of experience? It's simply because they don't care. Corporations like MindMed, Compass Pathways, and all of these corporate clowns don't prioritize you, your mental health, the well-being of our planet, or the well-being of psychedelics. They care about money, and that's why they're doing everything in their power to take control, even by holding on to the boogeyman effect of Tim Leary. However, what people like J.R. Ron fear is what needs to happen most. We the people, not the corporations, not the politicians, not the big money global interests, we, the earthlings of Gaia, need to stand up and not allow this buffoonery to happen. We need to stay true to the plants and the lessons they teach us. We need to all become our own Leary, our own Ginsberg, our own Picard, our own Shulgin, our own Watts, our own McKenna, our own Kesey, our own Wasson, our own Das, and lead a psychedelic movement of liberation and love. We need to stand directly against what these corporate clowns are trying to hand us, because they are not one of us. They are not one of the others. They are upholders of a consumerist dominated culture who are looking to extend their control. The emperor has changed the non-existent clothes into a false dichotomy, one that does not benefit us, the planet, or psychedelics. I hope you all become your own boogeyman and scare the shit out of these oppressive dogmatic systems, because these systems and models of control and the social phobia against liberation of consciousness is what needs to go. The future of psychedelics is up to us and the choices we make now in this moment in our human history. Will we allow corrupt corporations to steal nature from us and decide who is and who isn't worthy of connecting to the transcendental, or will we rebuke this attack and reclaim a liberated nature for ourselves? The choice is ours to make, and my advice, don't let it happen. Be a boogeyman and cast aside these mental and physical chains, shatter the illusion and restore the authentic. And like always, safe travels.